This is the Truth Network.
The news had come out in the First World War. The bloody Red Baron was flying once more. The Allied command ignored all of its men and called on Snoopy to do it again. Was the night before Christmas, 40 below, when Snoopy went up in search of his foe. Spied the Red Baron, fiercely they fought. With ice on his wings, Snoopy knew he was caught. Christmas bells, those Christmas bells, rang up from the land.
Welcome to the Christian Car Guy Radio Show.
I say this calls for action, and now.
Where are you, Christmas? Do you remember the girl you used to know? You and I were so carefree. Now nothing's easy. Did Christmas change or just me?
Where are you, Christmas 2024? I love that idea. I always have. Cindy Lou Who, right? From How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Where are you, Christmas 2024? So that song that you heard at the beginning of the show, Snoopy's Christmas, is a song by the Royal Guardsmen. It came out in Christmas 1967, and I was 12, but if you're a little kid like me, in 1966, the original Snoopy versus the Red Baron song had come out, and an 11-year-old boy, it was a huge hit. You know, it was quite an adventure of Snoopy versus the Red Baron, and of course we were brought up on Snoopy, and so this was a huge hit. And so when the Christmas song came out, I remember it. I really can. We lived in Michigan. It was snowing. I was at a friend's house. We'd played hockey all day. It was, and here's this song. And I'd never heard it. And it sounded like Snoopy was going to get shot down, and I was like totally bummed. And I just remember, it's just, a treasured memory. When I think about it, it almost makes me cry. And then when you put that together with Cindy Lou Who singing, Where Are You, Christmas? And the way she puts it, you and I were so carefree, right? Nothing's easy. Now nothing's easy, right? Did Christmas change or just me? And when you think about it, the seasons of Christmas, they come around every year, sort of like a spiral staircase. You're going up, right? And depending on your age, you might realize it's going faster and faster, right? It seems like, man, it was just not long ago and we were here again. So, for me, Jesus became the focal point. As I'm going up that staircase, right? As a little boy, I had certain sugar plums dancing through my head, Christmas Eve. But by 1991, I became a Christian, and all of a sudden, the season meant something completely different for me. And I had a completely different hunger and a completely different thirst, right? And, I was wanting Jesus to fill my heart, not my stocking. I was wanting that Christmas season to bring the ultimate dream that I've had forever, that prayer without ceasing, like that sense of his presence every moment, and being able to walk with him like that. And I don't know about you, but all that is quite nostalgic when you think about it. You got Christmases, depending on your age, you have Christmases when you were a child, Christmases when you were in high school or college, then you got Christmases as a new parent, and you were up all night trying to put that, if you're like me, we bought him one of those toy houses or whatever one year, and Tammy still laughs about me trying to do a 3-man job with one arm. It's crazy. But, it's fascinating to me when you think about it sentimentally, that biblically, the last month of the year has been celebrated. It was the month of Adar on the Jewish calendar. at least since Purim, which we'll get to that later in the show, but certainly you could say that it was celebrated from the time of Moses, because Moses was born in the last month of the year. I don't know if you knew that, on the 7th day of Adar, and he also died on his birthday. It's a fascinating thing. When you do a little study on that, you're going to find that, the idea of the Savior being born in the last month of the year was not a new idea, and certainly the idea of sharing presents and all that. And if you were to visit a Jewish family, you would find that their last month of the year, which by the way is not this, we're not talking about Hanukkah, we're talking about Purim. It happens in a different month, but their last month of the year, they have their most joyous holiday where they give gifts to the poor and they give gifts to one another and all that kind of thing, and it's meant to be joyous, and that happens, as it were, at the beginning of that season. They begin to celebrate it at the very beginning, just like we celebrate the idea of Advent. They celebrate Purim that way. They celebrate the whole season, and they celebrate it with joy. Now, with all that said, and now being very nostalgic, this is the Christian Car Guy Show. And so I was thinking from a nostalgic standpoint, like, do you remember like that famous Christmas adventure, either as a child, maybe it was with your children, or maybe, it was when you were in college, however that worked out, that time that you went on that road trip, and hopefully you were singing Christmas carols, and maybe it was snowing on the way, and maybe there was all sorts of other things. So, Bill, you've been thinking about yours. I've got mine. So how about I got Bill, my Christian insurance guy, with me?
Yes, I always learn so many new, interesting things when I'm on the show with you. It's fascinating. I grew up in Florida, so on a good winter, we were able to make a frost ball. There were occasionally times when we could go swimming on Christmas Eve. But I went to college at Lees McRae College and at Appalachian State. So some of those years were very, very, very snowy. And a few of the adventures, especially I can remember trying to get back up to the top of the mountain at Lees McRae on roads that were covered in lots of snow. I remember one where the snowplow, if it hadn't been for the snowplow coming along, I'd have been in all kinds of trouble. But the snow was falling so fast that I bet there was 2.5, 3 inches falling between the snowplow and me right behind it.
Wow.
So there was some really strong praying going on, trying to get back to from ASU. We'd go down to ASU and visit folks, and well into the night would be trying to get back up to the mountain, up to Lees McRae. The cool memories, right, of the snow. How about you? We want your calls. I would love to hear your snow car adventure. 866-348-7884, going to Grandma's house for Christmas, or whatever the situation was. 866-348-7884. 866-34-TRUTH. Of course, we're going to talk about a little bit about that Purim connection. We're going to talk, interestingly, about another connection you may have never made. Now, I love the idea that Jesus came wrapped at Christmas time, right, in swaddling clothes, right? And when you think about it, he was there in a manger, and he was wrapped by who? Mary and Joseph. And I don't know if you ever made this connection. I made it this week, and I've just been fascinated by it ever since, right? He was wrapped again. And who was he wrapped again by that time? Joseph and Mary, instead of Mary, Joseph, Arimathea, and Mary, right? Twice he was wrapped, and twice he was wrapped by Mary and Joseph in its own way. Something to, just ponder. Like, God has just been, he gives us these presents every year and things to ponder, like Mary did in her heart. And I'd love to do that, but I would love to ponder your Christmas adventure in the car. You can just think about singing those carols. My parents, they'd love to sing in the car. And we went on those Christmas adventures quite often. 866-348-7884, 866-348-7884. So it wasn't unusual at all for us to go to Rochester, New York, where my grandparents lived. And when you go to Rochester, New York, at that time of the year, you can count on the fact that it is going to snow. And, my dad, not unlike myself, struggled at time or two with road rage. And,
He would get quite colorful when you're, following somebody who was scared and they didn't want to drive very fast, or, when somebody else was driving and they would pass him going, 70, and he would call them, and, it always was something. And of course, my mom would try to get us to sing Jingle Bells, or, We Wish You a Merry Christmas, or whatever, all that much louder to try to calm down the situation. But realize that my father worked for Buick, and we always had these great big huge Buick station wagons. They called them estate wagons back then. And the back seat faced backwards. And since there were 4 of us kids, I had 2 older sisters and my little brother. So you can imagine a car full of 6 people singing their way to Rochester, New York. Some sweet memories. What are yours? We would love to hear. 866-348-7884. The season comes every year, and it's an opportunity to dig deep, both in our past and our present. It's like Scrooge, had experience. There's a Christmas present, a Christmas past, and a Christmas future. We'll be right back with a whole lot more.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Where are you, Christmas? Do you remember the girl you used to know? You and I were so carefree. Now nothing's easy. Did Christmas change or just me?
Where are you, Christmas 2024? So we've done this show a number of times because I just love the idea of looking for it. That there is a spirit that comes this time of year for, I think it has to do with, you're finishing another cycle. And just like we talked about, there's a spiral staircase and it's going up. And, you've got hopefully a year of growth in Christ that's happened. And now you're coming in for the finish line of 2024. And what will that look like as you finish this particular cycle? And it's kind of cool the way that, Ecclesiastes put it, that, there's a time and there's a season. And when you look at that word time in Hebrew, as you could probably guess I would, it ends with the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And so it's almost like you're tasting the end of the moment every moment. It's an interesting thing. Well, you just think about it. Today's going to be over and you can't go back. And this moment's going to be over. This radio show is going to be over here in about 20 minutes. You can't go back. However, you'll have a memory. And so you live in the present, but you undoubtedly have an opportunity to reminisce about the past. And so that's what we're doing today as we're thinking about, wow, what was your most amazing Christmas adventure in your life? When maybe it was with your own kids, maybe it was with your family. What did that look like? We would like to hear your story in Car Adventure. 866-348-7884 is the number to call in.
I heard a really interesting story about Schultz, who created the Peanuts, and that when I think it was CBS came to him and said, we want to do a Christmas special around the Peanuts, and he demanded that Christ be included in the format, and that it took a long time for him to come along and agree to do that. It's I did not give him as much credit for what he's done for the nation as I had.
Oh, Linus has made that speech. It was a setup of setups. Charlie Brown saying and then Linus lays it down like, here it is. This is what Christmas is about. It's absolutely amazing. And so, it's kind of cool that we had that in our generation, and God's going to raise up people in the next generation. Just like Charles Schultz, you can count on it. He always does. But another in one of our adventures, we lived in Michigan at this particular time. It was probably about the time of Snoopy and the Red Baron. And we decided my other grandparents had moved to Florida. And so we were going to go to, it's a good thing if you live in Michigan, you're going to go to Florida. And my little brother loved fried chicken. Well, if you take Interstate 75 from Detroit, from the Flint, Michigan area down through Detroit and all that, you'll end up in Kentucky. Just saying, at some point you're going to go through Kentucky on the way to Florida. And so they took my little brother, Mark, who loved fried chicken. We went to the original Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant where Colonel Sanders, you could picture the whole scene, man. My little brother, you've never seen so much chicken get eaten in your entire life. I mean, he was in chicken heaven.
That's back when their KFC chicken tasted good.
Right. And just things that pop up in your memory. I don't know if you remember this, but we had little tape recorders. Nowadays, they have CDs and all. Back then, you recorded on magnetic tape. And it was a little reel-to-reel thing. And, I had one of those, and I was recording everybody as we... Did you ever do that?
Yeah. And the pencil you used to fix everything.
You had a little microphone, and you would, it had a wire on it. And I guess those were my early days of radio, Nick. It was in the back seat of that Buick Estate wagon on our way to Florida. When we got there, my brother got so sunburned, he got dehydrated and ended up spending Christmas in the hospital. As all those memories come back, what about you? 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. So I did want to share this with you. It's from Esther chapter 9. Again, I'm going to go way back, okay? And you might remember that in the book of Esther that there was a bad guy by the name of Haman, and he has this plan to hang Mordecai, who was pretty much the high priest. He was the high priest of the Jewish nation at this point in time in Esther. And his plan was to hang him on the 14th day of Nisan, which happened to be Passover. So it's kind of an interesting thing, and that's in the spring, as you may know. But the reason that all of the book of Esther is pretty much highlighted the way that it is that Haman had decided that all the Jews would be annihilated on the 14th day of Adar, which is the last month of the year, or the Jewish year. Nisan was the month that he wrote the edict, but he wanted to hang Mordecai on the 14th day of Nisan, but who ended up getting hung was Haman. However, Purim is celebrated when the 14th day of Adar comes. And I don't know if you've ever put this together, but, when Jesus hung on the cross, also on the 14th day of Nisan, just saying, when he was resurrected, Satan kind of got hung not unlike Haman, right? By his own trick, his own scheme that he was going to foil all of mankind. He ends up hung out there like Haman did. And if you think about it, Purim comes months and months later. In other words, what Haman had written, this edict to kill all the Jews, was still out there, and all the Jews had to battle through this time coming up to the 14th day of Adar from the point of Haman's hanging until the last month of the year. Well, if you're like us, we still are fighting Satan, right? He's been hung out to dry, so to speak, but he still has all the shenanigans that we get to live with every single day. And it's fascinating to me, it really is fascinating, that Moses' birthday and his death day also happen in the last day of the month. Now, when you read Esther chapter 9, verse 20 and 21 and 22, which I'm going to do here in a second, just listen to the similarities between this idea and Christmas. Well, I guess I'm going to do it at the beginning of the next segment. But I think it's fascinating that if you really think about it from a sentimental standpoint, this season of the end of the year has just been holy in its own way for centuries. That's pretty cool. We'll be right back with a whole lot more, but we need your story. 866-348-7884. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Where are you, Christmas? Do you remember the girl you used to know? You and I were so carefree. Now nothing's easy. Did Christmas change or just
Where are you, Christmas 2024? What was your, famous or whatever holiday road trip you'll never forget. 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. I'll tell you, for Esther, I guarantee you this particular Christmas was an unforgettable one. So we were talking about Haman, and he was hung on the 14th day of Nisan, but the 14th day of Adar came, and Queen Esther was arguably the most powerful Jewish ruler of all time. She was the queen over 127 provinces, which at that point in time was essentially the known world. And she had, at this point in time, by the 14th day of Adar, in the year that the Jews were to get revenge on their enemies, or the enemies were to attack them, it was obviously a big battle. This particular year, the actual Persian kingdom was on the side of the Jews, and so they clearly had a huge advantage in this battle, and they certainly won, and they started to celebrate. And so Mordecai, who again was still the high priest at this point in time, he wrote the book of Esther, which is considered a scroll, which they call a Megillah, which I've always thought was kind of like interesting, Megillah the gorilla, for those of us who grew up in the 60s. But that scroll was a Megillah the gorilla. And so in the 20th verse of Esther chapter 9, here's what it says, and this is miraculous in my opinion. It says, "And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should be celebrating yearly the 14th and 15 days of the month of Adar. And as the days on which the Jews had rest of their enemies, and the month which turned from sorrow to joy, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor." Now, we just slow down for a minute. Mordecai wrote these things, which became scripture, right? And just like John wrote the book of John, or Moses wrote the book of Genesis, it's interesting to think that Jesus is the Word, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And in the 119th Psalm, in the 89th verse, it says, "Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in the heavens." In other words, those words that Mordecai is writing were already settled in heaven before he wrote them. John, the book of John, was written before John wrote it in its own way. I don't know how it all works. I really don't understand, but I think it's amazing to think that Mordecai sat down to write something that had been settled in heaven forever. And as he wrote this, to this day, the Jews' most joyous holiday, because they begin to celebrate this on the days of the month of Adar. And so they have something very similar to Advent that they've been celebrating, since Purim happened, I guess about somewhere in the neighborhood of 800 years, I guess, before Jesus came. But again, the reason that it's called Purim is they threw these lots, which were called purs. And so when they threw those purs, Haman, who was the bad guy in the whole story, he was thrilled to death because he knew that, wow, we're going to do away with the Jews on the last day of on the last month of the year. And I know it's a good time to do away with them because that's the time that Moses got done away with. Isn't that fascinating? I find it absolutely fascinating. But he failed to realize that it was also the month that Moses was born. Truly. And it's really cool. If you look in, I think it's Deuteronomy 31, if I'm not mistaken, in the first verse, it says, "Today is my 120th birthday." And so it's kind of cool that Moses, is saying, "Hey, it's my birthday." And really cool. You can, since we know that, again, that the Jews, when they crossed the Jordan, it was the 14th day of Nisan, and you can back up the 30 days of mourning that they had for Moses from the 14th day of Nisan, that when they crossed the Jordan, and then you'll see that obviously it was Moses that was born and died on the 7th day of Adar, and then you can see it was right at the end of the year. And I find all those things just beyond cool. That God knew. Now, I know there's a lot of people who tell you they don't know when Jesus was born for sure, and I'll go along with that. I don't know. I know these dates are for sure. I mean, I know that the 14th day of Adar is the day that they celebrate Purim. And I do know we celebrate a very joyous holiday and has been celebrated for, since the church, as far as you can go back to the 4th and 5th century, it's been being celebrated. And how cool is that, Bill?
Amazing to me that they used the moon as the basis for their calendar, so it stayed right. Where the calendar that we use, you can't tell what days are because they're off by a few. So during the Roman Empire, they were off by months. So it's hard to have the dates right and to know when anything happened specifically.
Well, actually, they have a leap year on the lunar calendar too. Like I think it's every 4 years or something. They have to make up days.
A day. But still, based on the moon, you know exactly what day something happened. When the Roman calendar, you're not real sure.
Yeah, it's. But I love the mystery of it, don't you? I mean, that's just part of the whole mystery of Christmas. It is, we know that these things happened. Mm-hmm. We're not exactly sure when they happened, but isn't it wonderful that we get a chance to celebrate it and think about it and realize that, oh my goodness, the author of the story, however you want to put it, the author of this book, he decides to step into the story. And I don't know if you've ever heard that. I'm trying to think of the radio announcer that always told the rest of the story. What was his name? This escaped me right.
Paul Harvey.
Paul Harvey. That's it. He told a wonderful story about this man who didn't believe in God, and he certainly was never going to celebrate Christmas. And he was a farmer, and one Christmas Eve, his wife says, "Come on, let's go to church. This is." Please, for me, for my Christmas present, will you come to church? No, I don't believe that, humbug kind of thing. And he sends her off to church. Well, it's a blizzard that night, and these geese get trapped, up against his barn in this blizzard. And have you ever heard the story?
No.
You're assuming what's going to happen?
No, I'm remembering a joke about
geese. Oh, okay.
Stuck in ice on it.
Anyway, these geese, he's trying to get them to come in the barn where they'll be warm, and they won't do it. And he is, just fumbling around, taking some bird seed, trying to get them to do it that way. He goes out and finds some corn. He tries to get them to do it that way. And he does all these things to try to get the geese in the barn. But the geese won't come in the barn. And then all of a sudden he goes, now, if I was a goose and I was the one goose that went into that barn, they would probably follow me. And about that time, the Christmas bells rang. And he fell on his knees and realized that's exactly what God did, right? He became one of us. He came from this unbelievable, oh my gosh, heaven, unbelievable. Joy, peace, all those things, wonderful, wonderful, to come, right, to Bethlehem, the house of bread, to be in this manger. It's just incredible story. And the neat thing is every year we get to reflect on it, and every year we get to ponder it, and every year, it takes on a new meaning, and every year we get a new detail. You'll hear another sermon from your pastor this year. You'll hear another radio show on it. You'll hear something else that will add to your ponderer. Right, Bill?
It's always fascinating for the show to listen to your show in December. It always gives me something to go back and study and double check on and celebrate.
Yeah, because for all of us, we're coming around on this spiral staircase, and I don't know I don't know where you are living today, but by the way, I would love for your call, whatever you want to talk about, 866-348-7884. But it's been really, really cold here, and when it gets cold, the grass starts to die, and it's no longer so green. And the leaves are, with the wind and the cold and all the leaves are finally, it's a season of death. And I don't know if you track it much, but unfortunately, most funeral homes will be filled between now and, New Year's. And it is the end of the year. And for many, many of you, I know it's a difficult year because there's empty seats at the table, right? But fascinatingly, it's all part of the rebirth process that he gives and takes away. And believe me, there's empty seats at my table that, when I think about my parents and all those things, but also the hope of being able to rejoin them only comes through faith, which is what we get by studying the Word and studying this. So we'd love for your call. When we come back, 866-348-7884.
Listening to the Truth Network, truthnetwork.com.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Christmas bells, those Christmas bells, ringing through the land, bringing peace to all the world and goodwill to man. The Baron made Snoopy fly to the Rhine and forced him to land behind the enemy lines. Snoopy was certain that this was the end when the Baron cried out,
Merry Christmas, my friend.
Oh, I love I love that line. That is the Royal Guardsman and Snoopy's Christmas from 1967, one of my all-time favorites. And we are talking today about Where Are You Christmas 2024? And we would love your calls at 866-348-7884, 866-348-7884. We got Mike is in Dayton, Ohio. He's got a Christmas car ride story for us. I love it. Mike, what you got?
Well, I was in the Marine Corps, and I'm driving back from California to Ohio, and I had a Chevy Sprint. I think it was a 3-cylinder car. And I left real late at night in California, and I drove pretty much all night and got to about Colorado, and I was dead tired. It was about 4 in the morning. And all of a sudden, the sun come up at 5, and I'm like, oh, gosh, I'm wide awake now. I'm going to go. So I go down the mountain of Colorado, and then all of a sudden it gets real flat through there, and I fell asleep.
No.
And, and I
it does get real
went
flat.
into the – yeah, it is. And I went into the median – and I was hitting those deflectors, those deflectors that are in the median.
Right.
And my brain was going donk, 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 and I was hitting those deflectors over and over and over again. All of a sudden, I woke up, and I'm like in Deflector City. I'm seeing these deflectors go all over my car. I slam on the brakes, and I said, oh, my gosh, I can't believe I just did that, And so I cleaned all the deflectors off my car, and out of the wheels and everything, right? And I said, well, I'm wide awake again, so I might as well go ahead. Yeah, I might as well go ahead and go, right? And so I'm driving down the road.
I hope the Colorado State Police aren't listening to this particular broadcast.
Oh, they are.
We found your man. We found him.
And you know exactly what's going to happen. And I was driving down the road, and all of a sudden the highway patrol comes up behind me, and he turns on his lights, and he goes, did you see who hit all those deflectors? And he's looking at my car up and down, and I'm like, and I told a lie. I says, yeah, I seen him. He's up ahead, and he just left. And he said, thanks. And he gets in his car and then takes off flying. So at the time, we only had maps, and I'm trying to figure out a different highway to go on. And the whole way home, I felt so guilty. Oh, I prayed to God all the way home. And so I'm like, oh, gosh, why did I lie like that? And I got away with it. So now I'm going to pay for it now. The Colorado's coming to get me now.
They've been waiting all this time to find out who was the culprit of the deflector destroyer. You're not going to want to say what highway it is. Don't disclose all the information, Mike, but it's quite a story.
Okay. It is. And I got home for Christmas on time, and I mean, my mom's a prayer warrior, and I'm sure she was praying for me the whole way there. And I probably shouldn't have made it, but I did, and so,
God is good. He protects us through all our shenanigans that we sometimes.
Shenanigans, yeah.
Yeah, and for me, one of my most favorite Christmas road trip memories was my first marriage ended up in a disaster, actually. My first wife left me. It was very sad. I was heartbroken. And my mother had moved to New Mexico to be with my brother and sister. And I lived in the time in Savannah, Georgia. And she paid for me to fly to Albuquerque, which was kind of like home to me at the time. And I stayed at a little apartment she had then. And it's one of those people. This is a seat that's not at the table anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those memories that's just so precious to me. So, that Christmas Eve, as would often be the case back in those days, they played It's a Wonderful Life. My mom said, "Oh, you got to watch this movie." I had never seen it, right?
Huh.
But I will never, ever, ever forget how tender watching that movie with my mother in that particular season of my life was that particular Christmas. It's just really, really, really precious. But it just speaks to the fact that, there are seasons. And he does give and he takes away, right? We have grandkids, and maybe I'll hang around a little bit longer and have some great grandkids. But I was thinking about it last night. I was at a concert for my granddaughter, who is now in high school. She's a sophomore in high school. And it wasn't all that long ago. I was sitting at the same high school watching my daughter in her dance concert, right? And you just realize this is just a different season. I mean, my other daughter, is sitting next to me in the bleachers, and I'm like, how wild is this? And I was sitting next to this young lady that was watching her child, and you could see how excited she was. And I said, man, time flies. Next thing you know, you'll be watching your granddaughter.
Well, yeah. And, it's so funny is my wife bought one of those electric cars since it's the Car Guy show. And last night we're putting this electric cars thing, and she says, we got to do this because we're not going to have time. And so I'm putting this together, and it says 40 minutes. And I know darn well it ain't going to take 40 minutes. And so we made it through putting this electric car together without arguing, fighting. And I think it was your prayers for my marriage. So,
So you say this isn't a full-size electric car. What kind of electric car are you making in 40 minutes?
Well, it was one of those toy cars that you could push on the gas, and it has motors and.
For one of your grandkids.
For one of my grandkids, yes. And she bought it online cheap, and and of course you have to put 300,000 parts together.
You used the instructions, so you just did it.
Oh my gosh! I says, okay, you read the instructions, honey. I'll follow the instructions and I'll put it together. And she says, that's the deal. And I don't know how we got through it, but we did.
Don't you love when you find out that you put that one piece on upside down?
Oh, I know.
The second one, you got to go back to.
And you got to go back about 4 steps later, like, clearly this is not fitting. Why is this not fitting? Oh, I see. Oh, no, I'm backtracking for, Yeah.
And I had to take the seat off to re-hook up the battery. I missed that part of the instructions. She said, I read it to you.
I think wives tell us they said things.
And I'm like, you did. I missed it. It's my fault. I'm humble. And so we made it through it. And I'm glad we don't have to do any more of that today or tomorrow or the next day.
Well, it's unforgettable. It's part of the adventure. Yes. It's part of the adventure of Christmas. And the thing I want to kind of close the show with this thought. So when you give a gift, you think about who you're going to give that gift to. Like you're thinking about right now the look on your grandson or your granddaughter's face when they open that car and how much fun they're going to have when they're driving around and all that stuff. Just how cool is that, right? And in a way, you're united with that person in the gift-giving process as your loving thoughts go that direction. Can you imagine what God felt like when he was wrapping Jesus for you 3,000 years before you were born? He could imagine Mike's eyes lighting up. He could imagine, my eyes lighting up. He could imagine Bill's lights. And everybody listening. He had you in mind, right? You specifically. And he was so excited about the day that you would realize what he'd done. And that man, talk about your ultimate connection that you can just begin to feel as you give gifts this Christmas. Think about how God felt when he wrapped the big one. How wonderful is that, right, Mike?
It is wonderful. And, if that's okay, I'll steal that from you sometime when I'm able to say that.
Please do. Remember, slow down. Jesus walked everywhere he went, got it all done in 33 years.
To the Truth Network and TruthNetwork.com.
This is the Truth Network.